We're riding with René Arnoux in a Renault RE20B Turbo around one of the world's classic road circuits, Monaco. And this, more or less, is the view racing fans get from the remarkable onboard cameras which are fitted to Grand Prix cars today. However, since the arrival of these cameras on the motor racing scene, people have commented that they give an unnatural, one-eyed view of the circuit because they're mounted on the side of the car, and that a lot of TV directors seem terrified of using them for more than a few seconds at a time. Clearly, what you want to see is this, a virtual driver's eye view of the circuit, and plenty of it. Welcome to Lap of the Gods. I'm sorry to snatch you away from that exciting ride round Monaco with Alain Prost, but there's more to come, I promise you. Thanks to Terrific Stuff videos, I can now show you a driver's eye view of an A to Z of Grand Prix circuits, from Adelaide to Zolder. What you're about to see is the work of Alain Boinard and his colleagues at Afava, a French company which has been making films for Elf Petrol since 1968. In the days before on-car TV, Alain would strap a 16mm sound camera to the rollover bar of an Elf-sponsored Grand Prix car for a few laps of filming during practice. The results are stunning. And now, for the first time on video, we've got a driver's eye view of many of the world's finest circuits. Some, like Brands Hatch, Long Beach and the Österreichring, are sadly no longer used by the Grand Prix circus. Others, Kyalami and Silverstone for example, have been changed almost beyond recognition since these films were made. But no matter. Lap of the Gods is a unique slice of motor racing history from the Turbo era, when Renault, Ligier, Lotus, Ferrari, Brabham, Williams, Tyrrell and others provided us with the most powerful Grand Prix cars ever seen. Now, in part one of Lap of the Gods, we invite you on a breathtaking ride round 12 circuits in the hands of such heroes as Nigel Mansell, Jackie Stewart, Mario Andretti, Alain Prost and Patrick Tambay, among others. Our A to Z begins, naturally enough, in Australia, at Adelaide.
In the mid-1970s, Sweden possessed two of the finest Grand Prix drivers in the world, Ronnie Peterson and Gunnar Nilsson. And this circuit at Anderstorp was brought up to Grand Prix standards in the hope that one or both could win his home Grand Prix here. It was built in 1968, but it was not until 1973 that the Swedish Grand Prix was first held. Neither Peterson nor Nilsson was destined to win the race, as by the end of 1978, both had died in tragic circumstances. The Swedish Grand Prix didn't survive them, for the circuit had few redeeming features, and with the local heroes gone, the Grand Prix itself had little appeal for the Swedes. Anderstorp did go into the history books, however, as the only circuit on which the fantastic six-wheel Tyrrell was driven to victory by Jody Scheckter in 1976. 2 years later, history was made here again, when Niki Lauda won the last Swedish Grand Prix to date in the notorious Brabham Alfa Romeo fan car, which was promptly banned from competition a week later. A smaller historical footnote is that Mario Andretti, now driving us around in his Lotus Cosworth, scored his best result here in 1975 in a Parnelli Ford. Not a lot of people know that. It must be patently obvious by now that the central position of our camera gives us an incomparably better view of the action than the side-mounted TV cameras. That's Jody Scheckter's Wolf leading and being passed by Patrick Depaille's Tyrrell. And here's Carlos Reutemann diving his Ferrari inside Mario's Lotus. But Jacques Lafitte passes the lot of them in his Ligier. Isn't this the way to watch a Grand Prix? All right, we know all the drivers are playing to the camera in this practice session, but it is still terrific stuff. If only the actual racing could be like this now and again. When three-times world champion Jackie Stewart drove a Tyrrell at Brands Hatch in 1978, he'd been retired from racing for 5 years. But he soon showed that he'd lost none of his extraordinary skills. He was fitted with a microphone for the occasion, so I'll let him talk us round the circuit.
To the start-finishing line of this lap. Put it into fourth gear for Paddock. Off-camber left-hander, bit of wide. Put the power down in fourth gear. Brake hard into third, up into second, down into second, in for Druitt. Hugging the curb all the way round, applying the power. Back in, straight into fourth gear from second, because it's downhill. Applying the power. Going along the bottom behind the pits, down into third gear. Long left-hander, a tightening corner. Car understeers a bit, applying the power. Accelerating along. Outside of the car, braking hard. Fourth gear now, for it used to be Hawthorns. Accelerating along in fourth gear. Drop it into third gear. Into third gear for this corner. Accelerating out into fourth gear, down Deer's Leap. Into third gear again for a tight right-hander corner over the curb slightly. Accelerating hard, down into second gear. Opposite lock into third gear, into fourth gear, going towards the bridge, braking hard, into third gear. And right at the end of the...
Now we ride with Nigel Mansell in his Lotus. Nigel has happy memories of Brands Hatch as he won his first Grand Prix here in 1985. He also won the last British Grand Prix to be held here the following year. Both victories coming in a Williams. Nigel never really gets going on this run. Notice how quickly the McLaren and Ferrari go by. But he gives us the chance to admire this marvellous circuit as it plunges and climbs through the woods. Most drivers loved Brands, regarding it as a real challenge, but it's now been shamefully abandoned by Formula One. Millions of pounds have been spent trying to turn Silverstone into something like a road circuit when there's one of the best right here. It's a funny old world. President Juan Perón of Argentina was a great racing fan whose influence led to the construction of this circuit, Autodrome 17th October, on the outskirts of Buenos Aires. It was completed in 1953, and the first Argentine Grand Prix was held the following year. The event continued until 1961, but the next Grand Prix wasn't held until 1972, when Jackie Stewart won in a Tyrrell. In 1974, the circuit was extended to its present length. Nelson Piquet won in 1981, the last Argentine Grand Prix to date. As we ride with Jean-Pierre Jabouille in his Renault, we can see that it's flat and featureless, with two long straights joined by this almost semicircular curve. It wasn't very demanding, but quite quick. Piquet's winning average speed in 1981 was almost 125 miles an hour. It's a surprising fact that during all the on-car laps filmed by Alain Bouinard, more than 100, nobody spun. More's the pity, as it would probably have made pretty exciting viewing. One driver did crash, however, and it was Senor Piquet here, who'll stuff his Lotus Honda into a wall in a minute or so. Meanwhile, let's watch this triple world champion in action. Detroit was one of the few circuits that ran anti-clockwise, and as we can see, it was very much a stop-and-go affair. Why Formula One persisted with these city centre events in America is a mystery. They were inevitably very slow. The race average here was about 80 miles an hour and made overtaking almost impossible, thus denying millions of American TV fans the very excitement they get from NASCAR and Indy racing. And with their concrete walls, tunnels, high wire fences and tall buildings, such circuits were very unfriendly to TV cameras. Despite this, since the demise of Watkins Glen in 1980, the USGP has been held in Dallas, Detroit, Phoenix and, heaven help us, in a car park in Las Vegas. Why this should be so when there's a truly magnificent 4-mile racing circuit at Road America, Wisconsin, is yet another mystery. Oh yes, and if you're wondering about Senor Piquet's shunt, it's coming up about now. Oh well, it can happen to the best, can't it? We'll turn a blind eye to that one, Nelson. So far, all these laps have been run in the Built on rocky terrain near Lisbon, the Estoril circuit hosted its first Portuguese Grand Prix in 1984, when Alain Prost won in a McLaren. Its main feature is this long 200 miles per hour straight, which has the rest of the track curling back and forth behind it. After a lap and a half to warm up his tyres, Patrick Tambay gets the Renault moving and closes up on a gaggle of cars. But it's impossible to tell what they are. Perhaps they should carry numbers on the back. But as the powers that be scarcely tolerate numbers anywhere on cars, even for the benefit of spectators, never mind TV commentators, there's little chance of that. As Tambay overtakes, we can see that he's passing his Renault teammate Derek Warwick and going after the McLarens of Alain Prost and Niki Lauda. his third lap and with a clear track in front of him, Patrick is really getting into his stride. Unfortunately, at this point, we run out of film. We've just left the stadium and pits complex and we're hurtling through the pine forest towards the first of Hockenheim's chicanes. Now Pironi drives flat out again, down to the Os curve where there's no chicane as yet. With the aid of a cunning mix, we're in the Os curve, and that's a Ferrari in front. We're approaching 200 miles an hour here before braking for the second chicane. Now the Ferrari rockets away on acceleration, passing a Brabham on the approach to the stadium. In spite of all the bugs on our lens, this has to be the best way to watch a motor race. The central camera position on Pironi's Tyrrell gives us an unrivaled view of the action as we go into another lap. Into the forest again, and but for the chicanes, it's just a flat-out blind until we reach the stadium once more. It's all very fast, but it hardly offers a great challenge to the driver. There's not much for the spectators to see at this circuit. 90% of the track in the forest is off limits, so most people are herded into the stadium area with its vast grandstands. The truth is that unlike the old Nürburgring, Hockenheim has no soul. There's absolutely no magic about it. Instead of being known for great deeds by great drivers, it's best remembered in sorrow as the place where Jim Clark was killed in 1968. And it was here too that our man Didier Pironi suffered the horrific crash that was to end his career in 1982. Although it was built with the best of intentions, it's impossible to rhapsodise about this Hungarian goulash of a circuit. In 1986, it hosted the first Grand Prix to be held in what was then the Eastern Bloc, and more than 200,000 people turned up to watch. Unfortunately, despite the fact that the Hungaroring is set in a natural amphitheatre, affording spectators a marvellous view of the racing, there was no racing, because the circuit's many constant radius corners and short straights made overtaking practically impossible. Having brought this processional track into being with much song and dance, 2 years later, Formula One then abandoned one of the truly great racing circuits, the Österreich-Ring. Philippe Streff in the Tyrrell gives us a good idea of the circuit's amphitheatre effect. And also of the Hungaroring's processional qualities. Run is ended when we get one in the eye from Nelson Piquet's Williams. Now, this is more like it. Imola is a real racing circuit that all the drivers love. You can almost sense Derek Warwick's enjoyment in his Renault. Named after Enzo Ferrari and his son Dino, Imola is a classic track, and nobody minds that Italy has fiddled itself a second Grand Prix by pretending that its location, San Marino, is a country in its own right. Maybe Brands Hatch and Donington should claim independence. As we begin another lap, Warwick accelerates hard, approaching 190 miles an hour by the time he turns into Tamburello. Then it's flat out down to Villeneuve Curve before braking hard for the acute left-hander at Tosa. And accelerating up over the hill to Piratella. Next, we go through the Acqua Minerale chicane at around 100 miles an hour and back up to 190 before the Variante Alta, which leads to another very fast stretch before Rivazza. we go through Varianta Bassa and up to the chicane. And Derek returns to the pits. Kyalami is another great circuit which has disappeared. A new one's been built, but this one is lost forever. So make the most of these 3 laps with Alain Prost in the Renault. That's Alain's teammate, Eddie Cheever, going by. Now let's go for a flying lap with the 2 Renaults. We pass the pits and head towards the famous Crowthorne corner at over 200 miles an hour, going into the corner at about 115. Downhill to Barbecue Bend, which is taken at about 155. Then through the Yungskai sweep, heading towards the right-hander at Sunset, going through at around 150 miles an hour in 4th gear. Then it's down to 2nd for Clubhouse at 100. Into the S's in 3rd. A bit of adverse camber here. Into 2nd for Leo Kopp, and then accelerate hard up through the gears. To the kink, and as Eddie Cheever heads for the pits, we continue. In 1984, Prost set the fastest lap here at over 133 miles an hour. Kyalami is over 1,600 metres above sea level, making it very hard on the turbo engines. In the mid-1980s, the uncertain political atmosphere in South Africa brought about the end of the country's Grand Prix after the 1985 event. It was revived in 1992, but on the new circuit. For those of us who loved the old one, Kyalami isn't Kyalami anymore. The United States Grand Prix West found its home here in 1976 after Englishman Chris Pook persuaded the authorities that a motor race through the streets would put the town on the map. He was right, but the Americans never took to Formula One. So in 1984, the Grand Prix circus departed and Indy cars moved in. That's the Brabham team of Niki Lauda and John Watson flashing past as Patrick Depailler leaves the pit lane in his Tyrrell Ford. Unlike other American street circuits, Long Beach wasn't built on the grid system, so it's not all right-angle bends and tall buildings. Cars can actually race and pass one another. That's Hadstock Shadow going through at the first hairpin, and now we accelerate hard down Shoreline Drive. It was while Clay Regazzoni was under heavy braking in his Ensign here for Queen's Hairpin that his brake pedal snapped in 1980, and the ensuing crash ended the popular Swiss driver's colourful career. And as we round Queen's Hairpin, Jean-Pierre Jabouille goes past in the Renault Turbo. Incidentally, this was the first time that Alain Boinard was allowed to send his camera out among other cars. Previously, he'd been confined to 5 minutes or so before official practice. Now we accelerate up the short hill which leads onto Ocean Boulevard and the finish, but not the start. That is on Shoreline Drive. Down the chute and onto Linden Avenue. Depailler is trying really hard now as he takes us for another lap. We end part one of Lap of the Gods where we began, at Monaco. By rights, this circuit should have been abandoned long ago, for it fails to meet several demands made of all other circuits by the sport's governing body. Racing here is impossible, and most drivers think they're wasting their time and taking unnecessary risks. But Monaco is the most glamorous setting in the world for a Grand Prix, and so it's beloved of sponsors and poseurs alike, which is why it continues. We continue too with Alain Prost, whom we saw briefly in our introduction. So pay attention, all you would-be aces. We're riding with the Professor in his Renault Turbo, and he will show us how it should be done. That's Alain's teammate, René Arnoux, ahead as we sweep round the swimming pool complex. Look closely and you'll see the camera mounted on the side of our news car. But we don't want that one-eyed view again. The two Renaults have the circuit to themselves here, and as Arnoux slows to let Prost by, we should remember that come race day, there'll be 26 cars on the track, to begin with anyway, and none of the drivers wants to be overtaken. Life is never easy at Monaco. And so, with thanks to all the teams and drivers for their help, we bring part one of Lap of the Gods to a close. But not quite, because we have a fascinating bonus for you. In 1976, Ken Tyrrell unveiled his sensational six-wheel car, designed by Derek Gardner. At Monaco, Alain Bouinard had the Tyrrell stripped of its bodywork, fixed one camera on the very front close to the tarmac, and another on a special Eiffel Tower mounting. This gives us a fascinating bird's-eye view of Patrick Depailler and those four front wheels in action. Be amazed.
Now you've seen that little lot, I'm sure you'll agree that Grand Prix drivers do earn their money. However, we're only halfway through Lap of the Gods, and in part two, we'll bring you more terrific stuff as our gifted chauffeurs take us around another 11 circuits, including Montreal and Monza, Silverstone and Spa. Don't miss it. Welcome to part two of Lap of the Gods. This time our chauffeurs include René Arnoux, Eddie Cheever, Didier Pironi and Niki Lauda, who take us around the fabulous Österreich-Ring and Spa, the old Silverstone and the almost forgotten Watkins Glen. So tighten your safety harness and put on your wet weather tyres, because we begin at Montreal in the rain.
It's at times like these that a racing driver really earns his money. In spite of having deeply grooved rain tyres on his Tyrrell, Patrick Depailler is constantly fighting wheel spin as he slithers and slides his way round this remarkable Montreal circuit. Built on the man-made Ile de Notre Dame in the middle of St. Lawrence Seaway, it runs around a large lake, and you could be forgiven for thinking that we're on that lake rather than beside it. The Tyrrell is more speedboat than racing car in these conditions, and the body of water on the track gives a fine mirror image of the passing scenery. Fortunately for us, Patrick seems to be the only driver on the circuit at the moment, so we can see where we're going, more or less. If we were following another car in this weather, we'd be driving blind in a storm of spray. Any driver who claims to enjoy racing in these conditions must have a very odd sense of fun. I should think Patrick Depailler is very glad that's over. Jacques Laffite follows the Brabham of John Watson out of the pit lane and onto the historic Monza track. Now he powers the Ligier past Watson, who decides he's having none of that. Out of the Rettifilo chicane, and Jacques goes by once more and into Curva Grande. Now we follow a Ferrari past Niki Lauda's Brabham. And another car before diving into the second chicane. Here we're powering through the Lesmo curves. With the Monza forest casting its September shadows on the track, it's impossible to recognise other cars as we come on them. In fact, it's pretty hard to see where we're going, and as we head towards the tunnel under the old banking, we're in serious need of some headlamps. Through the Ascari chicane and onto the back straight. Now the daunting, super quick Parabolica, which determines our speed on the main straight. And that's James Hunt flashing by in his McLaren. Driving out of Lesmo once more, and Laffite appears to be going pretty fast until this. Now on a somewhat brighter day, we join Eddie Cheever for a really quick lap in his Renault as he exits the Parabolica and accelerates hard down the main straight. And at something approaching 200 miles an hour, he decides to adjust his mirror. You'd fail your driving test on that one, Eddie. We're now riding on a track that's remained basically the same since Monza opened for business in 1922, which makes it the oldest circuit still in use by Grand Prix cars. Over the decades, it's been altered and rebuilt several times, but by and large, it's retained its original layout. From the beginning, it incorporated a speed bowl, but the first one was abandoned in 1933 after a triple tragedy. A new one went up in 1955, but it was terribly bumpy and potentially very dangerous, so it too was abandoned in 1960. It still stands. We're going under part of it now, a crumbling memorial to a bygone age. The long Monza straights provided some classic slipstreaming battles and split-second victories before the first of the dreaded chicanes was introduced in 1972. These were designed to slow the ever-quickening cars. They certainly did that, but they also put an end to some spectacular racing. Eddie Cheever is our chauffeur once more as we sample the abandoned splendours of the Österreichring. The Austrian Grand Prix was first held here in 1970, and the drivers loved it for its steep climbs and falls combined with fast sweeping curves to provide a racer's delight. Sadly, due to political wrangling and the fact that the circuit is right in the middle of nowhere, there'd not been a Grand Prix here since 1987. Unfortunately, that's all we have of Cheever's run, but now we switch to Patrick Tambay's Renault at the same circuit. This time, Alain Bouinard fixed his camera to the front of the car, almost at track level. This is another marvellous camera position, never tried in Grand Prix racing, which is crazy, for along with our previous central position above the driver's head, it affords us a truly sensational view, all the more so at a spectacular circuit such as this. As I've already mentioned, the Österreichring has been abandoned by the Grand Prix circus, and watching this film, one can only gasp at the folly of that decision. Grand Prix racing is watched annually by hundreds of millions, if not billions, of TV viewers, and they want to see exciting racing on exciting circuits. So why is it that they're fobbed off with a number of processional tracks which are also visually obstructive and deprived of great racing circuits such as this, not to mention Brands Hatch, Zandvoort and the original Kyalami? How wonderful it would be to see great tracks such as these in use again, preferably from a camera position such as this. Once again, we're riding with fast Eddie Cheever in his Renault on yet another fine circuit which has been lost to Grand Prix racing. This is the original long circuit at Le Castellet, named after the man who built it in 1969, drinks magnate Paul Ricard. This track became the home of the French Grand Prix, following the demise of the circuits at Reims and Clermont-Ferrand. Passing the pits, we accelerate up to around 190 miles an hour, heading for the left-right sweep at Verrerie. After Verrerie, the chicane. Then it's into the right-handers at Les Cols and Saint-Baume. And then the left-hander leading onto the famous 1 mile Mistral Straight. This turns into the very fast Senior Bend. Leading to Beausset, a semicircle. And that brings us to the Bendor chicane. Then it's round the hairpin. Sweeping right towards the left-hander, Latour, which brings us to the final corner on the circuit, Pont. And back onto the pit straight to begin another fast lap. Paul Ricard's superb facilities and location made it very popular with drivers and teams alike. It was also considered to be very safe, but the fatal testing accident of the very popular Elio De Angelis in 1985 resulted in a panic move which virtually cut the Mistral Straight in half, reducing the circuit length by more than a mile. In 1991, the French Grand Prix was moved to Magny-Cours for French political reasons. As with Long Beach in part 1 of Lap of the Gods, you're going to need your dark glasses here in Rio, for the sun is dazzling. It's also extremely hot, which is why Patrick Depailler has a plastic tube fixed to the side of his Tyrrell, forcing cooling air into his overalls. Flat, featureless and cursed with constant radius corners, this Jacare-Paguá circuit played host to the Brazilian Grand Prix for the first time in 1978. Much to the disgust of the locals, it was won by Carlos Reutemann, an Argentinian. One excellent aspect of the track is that the thousands of spectators can see all of it from these giant grandstands on the right, which overlook both main straights and the pits. Local hero Nelson Piquet was victorious here in 1982, only to be disqualified later. He was the uncontested winner the following year and again in 1986. When he became world champion for the third time in 1987, the circuit was renamed after him. Now owned by the British Racing Drivers Club, Silverstone has long claimed to be the home of British motor racing, and in recent years the club has spent a great deal of money supporting that claim. During World War II it was a busy bomber airfield, but by 1948 it had fallen into disrepair. It was then that the Royal Automobile Club leased it from the Air Ministry and formed a 3.7-mile circuit using the perimeter road and runways. The following year, the runways had been dispensed with, reducing the circuit length to approximately 3 miles and producing more or less the track that Jean-Pierre Jabouille is driving on now. In 1950, Silverstone was given the honour of launching the new World Championship for drivers with the British and European Grand Prix. The race was won by Nino Farina in an Alfa Romeo, and he went on to become the first world champion. There's no glamour to Silverstone, but it's always been very fast, with speed its main attraction. And in Woodcote, it had one of the great corners in motor racing, where cars teetered on the very edge of disaster as they blasted through with bags of opposite lock, while the spectators held their breath, waiting for the big accident which never came. Until 1973, that is. Then, at the end of the first lap of the British Grand Prix, Jody Scheckter lost control of his McLaren and spun, collecting, it seemed, most of the cars in the race. As a result of Jody's accident, this chicane was installed, taking the wonder out of Woodcote. Lap speeds continued to rise, however, and in 1985, Keke Rosberg took his Williams round at a mind-boggling 160 miles an hour, chicane and all. So, this is the circuit as it was then. And although Jean-Pierre Jabouille isn't going quite as fast as Keke, he still gives us a good idea of the essence of Silverstone. Speed. Following the demise of the magnificent old Nürburgring and more recently the Österreichring, the circuit at Spa-Francorchamps stands unchallenged as the greatest in the Grand Prix world. Made up of public roads sweeping through the Ardennes forest near Liège, Spa was originally over 9 miles long, but by the end of the 1960s it was considered too dangerous and the Belgian Grand Prix moved elsewhere. The Spa authorities, however, determined to get it back and planned a new circuit that'd meet the safety requirements of Grand Prix racing while retaining the grandeur of the old. In this, they faced the same problems as their counterparts at the Nürburgring. But whereas the Germans built a completely new track in the shadow of the old ring, the Belgians adapted their existing circuit by shortening it considerably, but making the changes absolutely in character with the original. The result was that whereas the bland new Nürburgring turned out to be a travesty of the old one, quickly rejected by Grand Prix racing and spectators alike, the new Spa proved to be a total success, drawing praise and admiration from all quarters. Patrick Tambay filmed 3 laps of this magnificent circuit, only to find that 2/3 of the way round the first, a huge daddy longlegs had tried to hitch a ride on the camera lens. We'll spare you the result of the collision, which was not a pretty sight. Happily, Patrick went out again later, this time with the camera on the nose of his Renault, and in close company with his teammate, Derek Warwick. Now we're rushing down the hill to Eau Rouge, regarded by many drivers as the most exciting corner in the world. And when you stand here and watch the cars go through flat out during a race, it's easy to understand why. It takes your breath away. Now we power up the hill, many cars reaching 200 miles an hour here, but not ours, to Les Combes, where we leave the old circuit and join the new road, which sweeps down to the valley below. You can see that Derek is on new tyres by the labels flashing round as he hammers on ahead. They don't last long, I can tell you. at Blanchimont, we rejoin the old circuit, heading uphill towards the pits and the hairpin at La Source. It must be admitted that this bit of filming was not a great success from our point of view. Tambay was asked to follow Warwick closely and does so. But as a result, we see a great deal of the back end of Derrick's Renault and not enough of the circuit. Also, Derrick's tyres fling more and more dirt onto the camera lens until we're in desperate need of a windscreen wiper. Oh well, you can't win them all. Nannini's promising Grand Prix career was halted by a helicopter crash in 1990. But here, he takes us round Suzuka in some style. That's the Lotus of Satoru Nakajima in front, going past the Zach speed of Christian Danner. Nakajima goes past the AGS of Roberto Moreno, and Nannini dives between Moreno on his right and Danner on his left. Terrific stuff. Now he's after Nakajima. Sandro goes for it, but Nakajima moves across, forcing him to put one wheel on the grass, which brings a suitable response from the Italian. Now he passes Martin Brundle's Zach speed with no problem. This is the Minardi of Nannini's teammate Adrian Campos. And there's Derek Warwick's arrows. Now, Sandro has the track to himself. Having driven 2 exciting laps with Nannini, we now take a more leisurely tour of Suzuka with Satoru Nakajima in a Lotus Honda. Located in a vast amusement park, Suzuka was originally designed as a test track for Honda by John Hugenholtz of Zandvoort fame. Built in a twisted figure of 8, it's unique in that it dives under itself right here. Suzuka has hosted the Japanese Grand Prix since 1987, when the Honda-powered McLarens were defeated by Gerhard Berger's Ferrari. To say that the Japanese were not amused at being beaten in their own backyard is a masterpiece of understatement. They weren't exactly laughing 2 years later when those 2 great McLaren teammates, Ayrton Senna and Alain Prost, collided at the chicane in front of a TV audience of billions. The following year, Senna used his Honda power to take Prost's Ferrari and his own McLaren out of the race at the very first corner. Suzuka may not be a great circuit, but it certainly has its moments. No attention to the figures you've just seen on that map. This particular Watkins Glen is actually 3.4 miles or 5.4 kilometres long. And we're riding with Didier Pironi, who's following his Tyrrell teammate Patrick Depailler. I say this particular Watkins Glen because this is the 3rd circuit in upstate New York to bear that name. The first was a 6.5-mile course running through the town of Watkins Glen itself. But in 1956, a new 2.3-mile track was opened, out here in the countryside. The US Grand Prix was first held here in 1961. 10 years later, extensive changes were made, which included adding more than a mile to the track. The new Glen was a vast improvement on the old, and it became very popular. But that could not prevent the almighty dollar from luring the United States Grand Prix away to a car park in Las Vegas. Now, Alain Prost is going to take us round Zandvoort, yet another great circuit that's been lost to Grand Prix racing. However, there are plans to revive it, and we can only hope that they succeed, for this is a splendid track. Having come this far with us on Lap of the Gods, you won't have failed to notice that some drivers tried harder than others when Alain Boinard's camera was fixed to their car. This isn't to criticise the slower ones. No one was expected to go flat out from a standing start on cold tyres. However, as we saw in part 1 at Kyalami and Monaco, Alain Prost always put on a show, driving really quickly in that wonderful fluid fashion that's made him the most successful Grand Prix driver in history. Here at Zandvoort in the Renault, he does it again. So I'm going to shut up and let the professor give us a 3-lap masterclass in the art of driving a Grand Prix car. Thanks, Alain. That was magic. And so we come to Zolder, the final round in our A to Z of Grand Prix circuits. And here we have Niki Lauda, yet another all-time great, as our guide in a Brabham. After the original Great Spa circuit was discontinued in 1970, the Belgian Grand Prix went from the sublime to the ridiculous, Nivelles and Zolder, before returning to the sublime new Spa in 1983. Zolder was often misty and damp as it is now, and generally remembered only with sadness as the place where Gilles Villeneuve lost his life in 1982. Niki Lauda's drive in amongst these other cars serves as a splendid reminder of what TV viewers are missing without the benefit of on-car cameras positioned above the driver's head. Wearing my armchair viewer's hat for once, I'd like to make a few comments on Grand Prix coverage for the future. Why are on-car cameras confined to the one-eyed side view? They're very small and can be fitted virtually anywhere. The Grand Prix teams are constantly telling us that they're at the cutting edge of the new technology, so let them prove it on TV. With all the electronic wizardry at their disposal, it's surely possible to fit permanent camera positions on every car, at the very front and above the driver's head, so that a camera can be plugged in like a light bulb at a moment's notice. And some of the other positions just don't seem to work for me, like a rear view almost obscured by wing and wheel, and Nigel Mansell's helmet bobbing about as seen from just in front of his cockpit. Surely what the viewer wants to see is what we're seeing now, the driver's eye view. And ideally, wouldn't it be nice to have more cameras? The World Champion should carry one at all times, and others could be allocated after the final practice session so that they can be spread over the field. Wouldn't you like to see the start of a Grand Prix live from the middle or the back of the grid for once in a while? And TV directors almost everywhere could make better use of these marvellous devices. Too often, they seem afraid to use them in case they miss a piece of the action with their trackside cameras, despite having instant replay at their fingertips. In Lap of the Gods, Alain Boinard has shown how on-car TV should be done. More than a decade has passed since he began making these films with a cumbersome 16mm movie camera. And yet, despite all its miniaturized electronic magic, television has yet to equal his superb results, let alone surpass them. It's high time we were given a driver's eye view, so that during every Grand Prix we can enjoy the Lap of the Gods.